What's going on, everyone? Today is October 5th of 2024. Welcome back to this, the 87th edition of the Super Stream, and what a stream this one should be. I would say that the first story we'll be covering in today's video is perhaps one of the wildest synchronicities I've ever discovered. And I don't say that lightly. I suppose you could say that about a lot of things, but something really cool we'll be exploring today. And how the death of Pete Rose is synced to the death of a famous video game player from 5 years ago. And I understand that many of you people probably haven't heard of him, but it shouldn't make the synchronicity any less staggering. After that, we'll take a look at more about Pete Rose and how his career, his life, and his death is numerically connected to Cobb, whom he took the all-time hits record from back in 85. On the other end of the spectrum in Major League Baseball, there's a player named Mario Mendoza, who is symbolic for futility in the league. And we'll look at how this week, in Major League Baseball, there was one series in the wild card round that went to the third game, and that was between the Mets and Brewers. Now, if you watched my last video, my first video on Pete Rose, you'll understand how this was the series of the four that were going on that were very much synced to Pete Rose and his numerology. And what a thrilling series it was. The Brewers with a huge comeback in Game 2, and then the Mets with a huge comeback to win in Game 3. Meanwhile, Cobb, who used to hold the all-time hits record, spent almost his entire playing and coaching career with the Detroit Tigers. And Detroit, despite having just a 0.2% chance of making the playoffs with a few weeks to go, stormed back and made the wild card round, and they actually defeated the Houston Astros. So there's a lot of syncs with Pete Rose going on in Major League Baseball right now. And in this Brewers-Mets series, the game-winning home run was hit by a man named Pete. And once again, all of this has to do with Pete Rose and Pete Alonso, the hero in New York. So we'll take a look at how all this connects by the numbers. But before we get there, I want to talk about, again, one of the most staggering synchronicities I've ever found. Now, when I was 16, I bought the game StarCraft for my PC. And for those who don't know, StarCraft is like the original esport. I played a lot of games competitive when I was younger, played against the best in the world in some of those games, but never could I hang with the best in StarCraft. I simply wasn't good enough. Over the years, I started following the game, even though I didn't play it. I've always been fascinated by it. And there's an American StarCraft commentator named Geoff Robinson who passed away in the year 2019. Now, after I did my video on Pete Rose, this video here explains how his life, as well as sports gambling in general, is synced up to the 9/11 code. You see that right there in the title. Now, when I made that video, I didn't even realize that Pete Rose broke the all-time hits record on September 11th of the year 1985. Pete Rose passing Cobb to become the hit leader. Now, this date, September 11th, 1985, is one that I've always had in my head. September 11th, 1985 is the date that Geoff Robinson was born. Robinson used the gamertag iNcontroL. And we're going to look at how I believe that his life and death is more evidence that a creator is in control of our reality. Now, I never did a post on Geoff after he passed away. He died suddenly at the age of 33 due to a pulmonary embolism. And from what I understand, he had suffered some health issues throughout his life. But his passing was still a shock to the community. So here we have a guy who was born on the same exact day that Pete Rose became the all-time hits leader. And to me, this is a geometric exhibition put on by the creator, as we will see. So for the next part, let's just watch Pete Rose as he breaks Ty Cobb's record in his hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio. This footage from the MLB YouTube page. Okay, now I don't know if you heard that. I'll play it a little bit louder. The announcer said, Rose has eclipsed Cobb. Eclipsed. Very interesting choice of words there. The word eclipse has reduction gematria of 33. And here, of course, we're looking at the language of Gematria, beginning with the base 4 methods, which all begin with the alphabetic order, which can be reversed or reduced. This also paves way for the extended methods of Gematria, which provide much larger numbers. And as always, we will review Latin and Standard throughout this video. Now, the word eclipse sums to 33, and as Pete Rose rounded first, you actually saw the number 33 in the background. On the wall, 33. Pete Rose, born on a date with a life lesson number of 33. But what also points to this eclipse code is the number. Pete Rose hit number 4,192. In Latin gematria, eclipse equals 192. This game was 8,192 days after Pete Rose made his major league debut. Pete Rose was 1,092 weeks old when a player named Ron Robinson was born. Now, let's continue watching to learn more about this synchronicity with Geoff Robinson. Check this out. Now, they haven't shown Pete Rose yet since he got to first base. All right, there. Now they show him for the first time. And in steps a player named Power, who wears number 48. This is the first shot of Rose after he broke the record. Of course, you got someone's hand on his ass, too, because it's baseball, but this stood out immediately. Power, number 48. Geoff Robinson was not your average video game player. When you think of StarCraft players, you probably think of someone too skinny or too fat. But Geoff was jacked. In fact, he competed in professional weightlifting events. He was a power lifter, capable of benching over 500 pounds at one point. Notice how his gamer tag, iNcontroL, equals 48, matching his birth town of Spokane, Washington, 48. And we get this guy named Power, wearing number 48. Remember, Pete Rose made his Major League debut on 4/8, which was the date of this year's Great American Eclipse. In fact, Power was 223 days after his birthday, which is the 48th prime number. And when it comes to the number 223, this is the number responsible for taking Geoff's life. Pulmonary embolism, summing to 223. Well, let's continue. So we cut back to the fireworks. We show another shot of the crowd throwing toilet paper around the stadium. And now let's cut back to Pete Rose. But what's this? There's a player named Robinson wearing number 33 standing in front of Pete Rose. Well, Geoff Robinson passed away at the age of 33. There he is, Mr. Robinson, 33. Geoff's hometown of Spokane, Washington equals 33. Now remember, all of these numbers that we're looking at are Jesus numbers. We start with 9/11, September 11th. which is the date that many Christians actually believe Jesus was born. 33 AD is often listed as the year of the crucifixion. Jesus potentially crucified at the age of 33. Crucifixion of Jesus Christ equals 303. Starcraft equals the 33rd prime number. And when you write out Geoff's full name, it sums to 156, which is the ordinal gematria of the number 33. Also, the 156th prime number is 911, like his birthday, September 11th. But also consider the year that this all happened. 1985. In Latin gematria, the name Jesus equals 985. So this guy here, number 33, is named Ron Robinson. You'll see him here wearing the 33 for the Reds. Rose's teammate at the time. Well, on the date of this game, Ron Robinson was 194 days before his birthday. And in the alphabetic order, his full legal name, Ronald Dean Robinson, sums to 194, matching Cincinnati Reds with capital letters. When Geoff Robinson passed away, it was under Brown lunation number 1194. Every new moon going back to 1923 has been numbered. This is called the Brown lunation number, okay? Well, let's cut back. And who's this? There's a player named Brown who sticks his name into the shot. Brown. Geoff, connected to the Brown lunation. 194 is also the ordinal gematria of September 11th, the date that this all went down. The 9/11 attacks were in 2001, which equals 194, just like the number 119. Now, when Geoff passed away on July 20th, the anniversary of the moon landing, measuring back to Ron Robinson's birthday, you get a span of 119 days. Ron Robinson was also 57 years old. This is the number that Rose shares with Moon, again in the alphabetical order. Now, when Ty Cobb played his final Major League Baseball game, do you want to guess the date that it happened on? September 11th, 9/11. This means Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's record exactly 57 years after Cobb's last game. Cobb's last game was also 73 years exactly before the 9/11 attacks. And in reduction, the name Geoff Robinson equals 73. Don't forget, the World Trade Center first opened for operations in the year 73. Destroyed on September 11th. Now, I could have done a post 5 years ago showing you some basic numerology with Geoff Robinson and how he was murdered by the numbers, but that would not explain the synchronicity that occurs on the same date he was born with this event. This stuff blows my mind out of the water to this day. But let's continue because there's more. Geoff Robinson died on July 20th, the anniversary of the moon landing. This date is written 720. In Sumerian gematria, his gamertag iNcontroL sums to 720. And Ted Power, the first man to pat Rose on the back on TV, was born exactly 720 weeks after Pete Rose. Now, although the moon landing occurred on July 20th, it wasn't until July 21st when someone supposedly set foot on the moon. And this is the other date of death that's given for Geoff. You'll see this thumbnail, for instance, lists his death as July 21st. And it's possible it was just overnight and no one's really certain. But again, this is all synced up with the moon landing, which started on the 20th and then concluded on the 21st. Notice how the name Robinson has matching 361 gematria with moon landing. But there's another layer of synchronicity that also blew my mind. Back in 2021, I did some work on Ken Jennings' winning streak on Jeopardy! And towards the end of this post, I point out a riddle connected to the game StarCraft. I believe Geoff Robinson was a Zerg player, although I'm not certain about this. I think he played Zerg. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Well, back in 2004, a woman named Nancy Zerg defeated Ken Jennings to end his 74-game winning streak. And this is interesting because the Zerg are usually portrayed as red in the game of StarCraft. And on this episode, Nancy Zerg dressed up in this big white shirt with a collar on it. Or I'm sorry, red. Zerg wore red for this game. Well, this episode aired on November 30th of 2004. And look at how old Geoff Robinson was on that date. 7,020 days or 7,021 with the end date. And then he died 7 months and 20 days after the anniversary of that episode, on the date 7/20. Matching his name, matching this connection with Ted Power and Pete Rose. I ask you, who is writing this script? This is so incredible. You know, it's one thing to have synchronicity in death, but when you can go back to the day that someone was born and find synchronicity. And remember, StarCraft is not a game that you can script someone to be good at, maybe like football or basketball, for instance. StarCraft is probably the most difficult computer game in the world. It requires lightning reflexes, quick thinking, expert strategy, experience. And the fact that this guy was like the best player in America at one time, this tells me that there's something way deeper going on when it comes to numerology and gematria. And again, it's why I started this work, because it's not just, you know, powerful rich people in a smoky room. They are envious of the creator and are attempting to duplicate what he does. But again, I don't ask you to believe anything I say. I just want you to look at the information and use it to grow your perspective. Now, that whole StarCraft riddle with Jeopardy focused on Jim Edmonds, another baseball player, because Ken Jennings was born in Edmonds, Washington, and Jim Edmonds has some strong 666 connections with Pete Rose. The name Jim Edmonds sums to 106 in ordinal, matching the name Robinson and matching the game StarCraft. And then we get this guy, Ted Power. Ted Power was born on a date with 106 numerology, and the name Ted Power also equals 106. The game StarCraft was first released on the 31st of March, 31/3. Geoff Robinson died a span of 313 days after his birthday, matching the name James Patrick Edmonds. This is the 65th prime number, and StarCraft equals 65. Now, let's go back to Pete Rose and the celebration in Cincinnati, which lasted several minutes. I think it was like 7 or 8 minutes. He just stood there and the crowd cheered. Well, a little while into this, Pete Rose finally gets choked up, right? And he's hugging this player who's wearing number 19. And the announcers go on and tell the story how these two men used to be roommates, born just a month apart from one another. And Tommy Helms, the guy on the right, is now a bench coach for the Reds. In fact, Tommy Helms replaced Pete Rose as the manager after Pete Rose was banned from baseball. Now, look at the number that Tommy Helms is wearing. Number 19. Pete Rose died a span of 1,900 days after Geoff Robinson died in the year 19. The name Tommy Helms matches Metonic cycle. And Tommy Helms was born on May 5th, or 5-5, matching the reduction value of Metonic cycle. Now, why do I mention the Metonic cycle? Well, the Metonic cycle is probably the most significant cycle of the moon, and it lasts about exactly 19 years. 19. The name Geoff Robinson also matches Metonic cycle in ordinal reduction and the mathematical methods. And when it comes to the city of Cincinnati, the Metonic cycle is super important. If you go backwards 19 years, this is also exactly 235 lunar phases or synodic months. It's also exactly 254 sidereal months or lunar orbits. Cincinnati, Ohio has gematria of 235, while Cincinnati sums to 254. So this is all wild stuff right here. And again, I believe this speaks to a greater order and geometry of our universe, the world that we live in, the material field of consciousness that we call Earth, and the random events that occur in it that are not so random. So, next up, I want to talk about how this all syncs up with Ty Cobb, the man that Pete Rose broke the record of back in 1985. And there's a ton of numerology on this. I made a mega post that you can find linked below, but I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to go through the parts that are important and bring us into this Brewers Mets series that essentially was a tribute to the numbers of Pete Rose. We start with the fact that Pete Rose had his record-breaking performance exactly 16 years before the 9/11 attacks. The 16th card of the major arcana of the tarot is the Tower, which is, of course, highly connected to the 9/11 attacks with people jumping out of the burning buildings. Pete Rose was banned from baseball 12 years and 18 days before those attacks. That's like the birthday of Ty Cobb, 12/18, December 18th. And Ty Cobb, his whole life and career is also connected to 9/11. As I pointed out, his last game in baseball was on 9/11. Well, the name Ty Cobb sums to 119 with capital letters. And he was born on a date with an upside-down 9/11. 116. Ty Cobb died on 7/17. Well, 7 times 17 is 119. The number 119 has matching gematria with Pete Rose, Ty Cobb, and another famous player named Mario Mendoza. In baseball, if you're a really bad hitter, you might finish the year under the Mendoza line, which means you hit for under a 200 batting average. As Mario Mendoza failed to hit 200 in most of his 9 seasons in the major leagues. So while we have Pete Rose and Ty Cobb, the greatest hitters ever, we also have Mendoza, whose name is associated with bad hitters. And the New York Mets, who just defeated the Milwaukee Brewers, have a manager named Carlos Mendoza. So more on this, because there's a huge riddle with Carlos in a little bit. But first, when Ty Cobb played his first ever major league game, it was on the date August 30th, or 8/30. It was for the Detroit Tigers, and notice how both Detroit, Michigan, and Detroit Tigers equals 83. Ty Cobb's nickname was the Georgia Peach. First of all, he was from Georgia, which is a state associated with the peach. And then think about his last name, Cobb, right? A lot of people like peach cobbler. So he gets this nickname, the Georgia Peach, which is also 83. Well, Pete Rose started his major league career at 8,030 days old. The name Rose has matching 83 gematria with moon. And the name of the pitcher he got his record-breaking hit off of, Eric Von Schau, also equals 83. And then Pete Rose died on a date with 83 numerology at the age of 83. So measuring from the death of Pete Rose to the date of Ty Cobb's first ever game in the major leagues was exactly 119 years and 1 month. This is the same 4 digits as the 9/11/01 terror attacks. 1191. Notice how his nickname Georgia Peach equals 1109 using square numbers. The number 1984 equals 1109 in Latin gematria. And there's 19,840 days between Cobb's and Rose's birthdays. In the year 1984, Pete Rose was traded back to the Cincinnati Reds. And then he broke Ty Cobb's record 2 years later. So, Pete Rose's record-breaking hit came off of Eric Schau, whose name equals 116 in upside-down 9/11. And Eric Schau was 116 days after his birthday. Pete Rose's last game in baseball was 11 months and 6 days later. And look at the digits in his age when he died. 1,001 months and 16 days. His last game, measuring back to Ty Cobb's last game, also had an upside-down 9/11. I'm not going to go through every single one of these. You guys can look at the post, but look at all of these 9/11s that connect them. And then we get this player, Mario Mendoza. And his name is 116 and 9/11. Mendoza debuted on the 116th day of the year, 11 years and 19 days after Rose debuted. He's also got a bunch of 9/11 connections to Ty Cobb and the World Trade Center. But here's a big one. When Pete Rose was traded back to the Reds in 1984, it was 116 weeks after Mario Mendoza's last game. Well, the 116th prime number is 643. Mendoza was born 116 months after Pete Rose, and then Rose debuted exactly 641 weeks later. So huge connections with these three players. But why is this number 116 so important? Well, not only is it an upside down 911, but it's also the first number with Latin Gematria of 985. Rose broke the record in the year 1985, and Mendoza's career ended 6,985 days after Rose's began. Remember, Jesus has that 985. On the date September 11th, 2001, 4 Boeing 747 airliners crashed, reportedly. Well, when Ty Cobb died, he was exactly 74 years and 7 months old. His death was also exactly 747 sidereal months after his first Major League Baseball game. And again, when it comes to measurements of the moon, synodic months and sidereal months are a little bit shorter than the typical month on the Gregorian calendar that most of us are used to. But the measurements are just as important nonetheless. So this means Ty Cobb was 74 when he died. Mario Mendoza made his debut in the year 74. And when Ty Cobb died, Pete Rose was exactly 7,400 days old. This reminds us that the World Trade Center stood just a few blocks from the 74th meridian on Manhattan Island. 74 degrees west. Furthermore, Pete Rose was also 20 years and 95 days old when Ty Cobb died. The World Trade Center equals 295, and the World Trade Center was destroyed 2,095 weeks after Ty Cobb died. Pete Rose was born during lunation 226. Ty Cobb equals 226, a number connected to 33. Remember, the World Trade Center was bombed on 2/26, February 26th. Okay, there's one more thing I want to look at from the video. When Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's record in Cincinnati. I guess we're going to watch this Post Malone ad first. What's up, Post? What's your next genre, buddy? All right, so Pete Rose gets this hit, and he's standing on base, accepting the adulation of the Cincinnati faithful. And listen to the announcer here at this point.
Be down there to shake his hand right now. Well, there is love aplenty here in Cincinnati. There is love aplenty here in Cincinnati. There is love aplenty here in Cincinnati.
He says, there was love aplenty here in Cincinnati. That's right, the love. The love was flowing deeply for Pete Rose. You could say it was all roses for Pete Rose. Of course, the color red, playing for the Cincinnati Reds. You can see the theme here. Well, notice how love has gematria of 775. In satanic gematria, another significant method of this study that's structured around the number 666, Ty Cobb's full name equals 775. Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's record during Brown lunation number 775. In fact, he broke the record off of pitcher Eric Shaw, whose name sums to 775 in standard. Eric Shaw died a few years later from a drug overdose on March 16th, or 316. Remember, this is the Hebrew value of Jesus. And I mentioned all of these 74 syncs with Jesus, and we know Jesus is love. Well, this pitcher's name, Eric Von Schau, also equals 74. And he was playing for San Diego when Rose broke his record. San Diego equals 74, matching Jesus and Jesus Christ. So the day that we celebrate love is Valentine's Day, which is written 2/14 on the calendar, February 14th. Well, Ty Cobb debuted during Brownlow Nation, -214. And then Pete Rose made his debut 21,040 days later for the Cincinnati Reds, which equals 142. These are the same digits found in I Love You, which equals 124. And when Pete Rose broke the record, it was on a date with primary numerology of 124. Pete Rose was the 124th prime number of days old when he made his major league debut. Well, times 10, but there you see it. Pete Rose made his major league debut exactly 90 weeks or 20 months and 23 days after Ty Cobb died. These are numbers connected to the moon in both ordinal and Hebrew. Meanwhile, Mario Mendoza was born on Pete Rose's 10th lunar birthday. A lunar year is simply 12 lunar phases or synodic months. So Mendoza, born on Rose's 10th lunar birthday. The name Rose and Moon, both 57 like eclipse. The moon with a 57-degree range of declination. The name Cobb equals 57, so does Georgia Peach. And again, Rose broke his record exactly 57 years after Cobb's last game. There's some more intriguing coding the number 666 is relevant to, but maybe I'll come back to this if I have time. But what I want to show you next is how the Major League Baseball postseason so far in the first round was, quote-unquote, scripted around the numbers of Pete Rose. We start with Game 2. The Mets entered the game with a 1-0 lead and were trying to clinch the series. They had a lead, 3-2, going into the 8th inning. And they sent out one of their best pitchers named Phil Maton. Now, how wild is this? Phil Maton. Did I not just talk about the Matonic cycle, which is credited to an astronomer named Meton? So enter Phil Maton. And instead of closing the game out, Phil Maton gives up 2 home runs, which surrenders the lead, and the Brewers end up winning the game. See how this headline has Gematria of 254 in 2 ciphers? Well, if you remember, the Metonic cycle is exactly 254 lunar orbits. The name Meton equals 225. And this is the number I said connected Pete Rose to the Mets and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where this series was played. Mets, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Rose all equal 225. Phil Maton gave up a home run to Jackson Chourio, and it was Chourio's second blast of the game. Chourio was 20 years, 205 days old for this game. 225. Astronomer Meton of Athens has gematria of 155 and 930. And if you recall, in my video on Pete Rose, I mentioned how Pete Rose equals 155, and he died on the same day the Reds finished their 155th season. And Rose died on the date 9/30, matching Meton of Athens. So these two Brewers who hit a home run off of Phil Meton were born 66 months and 8 days apart. In Latin gematria, Metonic cycle equals 668. The United States was 90,668 days old when Pete Rose died. In fact, Pete Rose got his record-breaking hit off of a pitcher named Shao. And the name Shao equals 668. So the big home run was hit by Garrett Mitchell in the Brewers' 8th inning. But this wasn't the first time Garrett Mitchell torched the Mets. Back in 2013, Garrett Mitchell hit this walk-off home run, which ended the game against the Mets, and this was the first series of 2023. Well, now in the last series of 2024, Mitchell torches the Mets again. Notice how these games were exactly 17 months and 4 weeks apart. And it was 174 days before Phil Meton's birthday. Meton of Athens sums to 174 in Greek isopsephy, and Meton was a Greek astronomer. Meton of Athens also equals 1074 with Fibonacci numbers. Meton on its own sums to 1465. Phil Meton was exactly 1,645 weeks old for this game. His age in months also matches his name gematria. Garrett Mitchell's walk-off homer last year, was also 1 year, 180 days before his heroics in the playoffs. Metonic cycle equals 1108. Look at both Milwaukee and Wisconsin with that 118 gematria. Well, if you multiply 11 times 8, you get a product of 88. And pitcher Phil Meton wears number 88. The number 8 is the shape that both the moon and sun make throughout their respective cycles. ESPN's headline sums to 808. This game was 8 days before Yale's anniversary. And Phil Meton was born 58,888 days after the founding of Skull and Bones. Now, we'll talk more about this Skull and Bones riddle in a little bit, because this all connects back to Pete Rose and Geoff Robinson. Now, I have a few more notes on this. Again, the blog is linked below if you want to see more. But I'm going to focus on the important parts for the sake of this video. The Milwaukee Brewers have a very intriguing connection to the number 223. The principal owner of the Milwaukee Brewers is Mark L. Attanasio. And notice how his name equals 223. He owns the Milwaukee Brewers, which equals 223. And he paid $223 million for the team. This is the Hebrew Gematria of the moon, 223. This game was played 2 months and 23 days after Phil Maton was traded to the Mets. And he gave up a 2-run homer to Garrett Mitchell. The name Garrett Mitchell has matching 223 Gematria with Metonic cycle using capital letters. Now, this has been a theme of this channel for quite some time. Yale University, home of the 322 order, turned 322 years old in 2023. Skull and Crossbones 223. You know the drill. Game 2 was played 359 days after Yale's special anniversary. And 359 is the 72nd prime number. Jackson Churio, Garrett Mitchell, Phil Maton III, and Maton all have Gematria of 72. So the pitcher, both guys who hit home runs, and the pitcher's last name, all 72. Jackson Churio, even he has the 322 with capital letters. All right, so Jackson Churio was born 572 weeks after Phil Maton, exactly, and 5 years and 27 weeks after his teammate Garrett Mitchell. This is the Latin Gematria of skull and bones, 572 without the ampersand, 527 with the ampersand. And this game was played 5 months and 27 days after the anniversary of Garrett Mitchell's walk-off against the Mets. This brings us back to Geoff Robinson and Pete Rose's hits record. Check this out. Pete Rose died 5 years and 72 days after Geoff Robinson. Ron Robinson, the player who wore number 33 and stood in front of Pete Rose, he was 8,572 days old for Pete Rose's record. Pete Rose played his last MLB game 29,572 days after Ty Cobb played his first. And then we also got this Ted Power. Well, Ted Power was born 7 years and 52 days before Ron Robinson. And Skull and Bones also equals 752 in standard. The name Ronald Dean Robinson equals 1752. So if we measure from this date on the screen, October 9th of 2023, the date Yale turned 322 in 2023. Geoff Robinson died 220 weeks and 3 days before that date. Ted Power was 30 years, 223 days old for Rose's record. 3223. When Pete Rose broke the record, he was exactly 44 years, 4 months, and 4 weeks old. Skull and Crossbones equals 444. So does Skull and Crossbones 322. Or Skull and Bones 322. Remember, the World Trade Center first opened on the date 4/4, or April 4th. Pete Rose broke the record 4,544 days later. And the pitcher who gave up his record hit, Eric Shaw, died exactly 444 weeks after he gave up that hit. Yale's Skull and Bones equals 192, just like Secret Society, just like Skull and Bones. Well, Phil Maton gave up these home runs 192 days after his birthday. And the Yale Skull and Bones Society is 192 years old. Garrett Mitchell's walk-off was 187 days before Yale's anniversary. That's like Brotherhood of Death. But to wrap this super stream up, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. Or, I'm sorry, 2 days ago now. October 3rd, when the Mets gave the Brewers a taste of their own medicine, coming back in the 9th inning. Now, I'm kind of a baseball stats nerd, right? So this stat blew my mind. Never before in the 150 plus years of baseball has a team gone into the 9th inning of a playoff deciding game, losing, and then hit a go-ahead home run. I might have bungled how I said that, but this was the first time in history that this happened. A team trailing in a playoff clinching game, a decider, hits a go-ahead home run in the 9th inning. It's never happened before. And of course it happens to my Brewers. I mean, I was as crushed as someone who knows about this knowledge can possibly be. But it was amazing. Because again, it was Pete Alonso reminding us that Pete Rose just died. In my video on Pete Rose, I talk about how his death is synced up to the Pi Day lunar eclipse next year on March 14th, or 3/14. Well, look how old Pete Alonso will be for that eclipse. He'll be exactly 30 years and 14 weeks old on the date 3/14. Incredible. But what's important to understand is that this Game 3 was a tribute to Mario Mendoza and the famous Mendoza line. So again, with Rose and Cobb, you have the greatest hitters. Futility at the plate represented by Mario Mendoza. So even though it was Pete Alonso who hit the big home run, there was another run scored by a player named Jesse Winker. Now, this one crushed the hearts of Brewers fans because Jesse Winker plays for the Mets this year, but last year, he played for the Milwaukee Brewers. And the Brewers paid him $8 million to be a big power bat. But he sucked. He only hit one home run in 61 games. So the Brewers fans hated him. He got booed at every plate appearance. He got in verbal arguments with Brewers on the field. They said, meet me in the parking lot, we're going to fight you. Like it was serious business, right? Notice how Jesse Winker made his debut on April 14th. Well, isn't that interesting? April 14th is the birthday of Pete Rose. Pete Rose played his final MLB game on August 17th. Well, Jesse Winker was born on August 17th, so he's got crazy Pete Rose connections right there. All right, so Mario Mendoza. Notice how the name Mario equals 200 in standard Gematria. And anyone who cannot reach a 200 batting average is under the Mendoza line. And check out Jesse Winker's batting average for the Milwaukee Brewers last year. He hit 199, which is as close to the Mendoza line as you can get without reaching it. The city of Milwaukee sums to 199. And the pitcher this time was Devin Williams. Brewers closer Devin Williams blew the game for the Crew. And the name Devin Williams equals 199. The Mendoza line. In the 7th inning, the Brewers took the lead on back-to-back solo home runs. The first home run was hit by Jake Bauers. Jake Bauers was born just 1 day before Pete Rose turned 19,900 days old. The other home run was hit by Sal Frelick. Sal Frelick was 199 days before his birthday. When you measure from the birthday of Jesse Winker to Devin Williams and Pete Alonso, you get the same numbers found in the Gematria of Mario Mendoza, 1140 and 1160. Now, before scoring the 4th run, Jesse Winker got to second base on a steal, and he immediately pointed to his head as if he was injured. But if you watch the replay, nothing happened to him. He's fine. This was all an excuse to bring out the manager of the New York Mets, a manager named Carlos Mendoza. Look at this, Carlos Mendoza, a guy who shares the name with the Mendoza line. Mario Mendoza sums to 64, which is the number that Carlos Mendoza wears. Carlos was 311 days after his birthday for this game, which is the 64th prime number. All right, so when you look at Ty Cobb, I want to point this out. So the World Trade Center, September 11th, and Cincinnati Reds all have Gematria of 159. Ty Cobb made his Major League debut in 1905, while Mario Mendoza was born in 1950. Mendoza debuted 31,905 days after Ty Cobb was born, and Ty Cobb would have been 41,905 days old for September 11th. So this 1905, right? Eric Shaw, who gave up Pete Rose's hit, was born on 1905, the 19th of May. So these digits are really important. Well, look at the name Jesse Winker. 159. In fact, Winker also 159. Carlos Mendoza was born exactly 1,509 weeks after Mario Mendoza was born in 1950. The Brewers' first run of the game came off the bat of Jake Bauers, who was 10,950 days old, or 590. This series started Brown Blue Nation number 1,259, and it was won by Pete Alonso, who was 19,595 days younger than Pete Rose. The name Jesse Winker has matching 894 Gematria with Devin Williams, and Pete Alonso's age ended with 894. But I think this is another tribute to the number 33, which equals 895, because when Jesse Winker played for Milwaukee, he wore number 33. And now he wears number 33 for the New York Mets. And of course, New York equals 33. Jesse Winker was born 33 weeks and 3 days after Mario Mendoza's birthday. And in reduction, Mendoza equals 33. The 33rd prime number is 137. Jesse Winker has primary birth numerology of 137. And for Game 3, he was 11,370 days old. The Brewers announcer, Bob Uecker, better known as Mr. Baseball, a huge celebrity back in the 80s and 90s. Bob Uecker was born during lunation 137. We talked a bit about the Metonic cycle and its connection to Cincinnati, Ohio, and Pete Rose. Well, in the Metonic cycle, on the lunar calendar, every 19 years, 7 of them have a 13th month. Metonic cycle, 19 years, and 13th month, all sum to 197. Again, every 19 years, 7 of them with a 13th month. The name Rose has matching 197 gematria with moon in Satanic. And look at how both Mets and Brewers equals 197. The Brewers moved to Milwaukee in the year 1970. And on Thursday, when their closer blew the game and the series against the Mets, he was 10,970 days old. In fact, the 2 Brewers who hit home runs in this game, their birthdays are separated by 197 days. In fact, there's actually a Jesuit order riddle between Jake Bauers and Sal Frelick, who went back-to-back on consecutive pitches. The name Salvatore is connected to the Jesuits. Sal Frelick, or Salvatore. On the Jesuit emblem, it says IHS. This stands for Jesus Hominum Salvator. So that S, it doesn't say it on the page, but the S means Salvator, right? Well, notice how Sal was born on the 19th of March, or 19/4. Both Catholic and Jesuits equals 194. Sal Frelick was born 1,658 days after his teammate Jake Bauers. And in Standard English Gematria, Society of Jesus equals 1658. And you really got to appreciate Jake Bauers' numerology. Because when he moved to the Brewers, he changed his number to number 9. And the number 9 is a number of the moon, which equals 90. Brewers also equals 90, which might have something to do with why I'm such a huge Brewers fan. My last name equals 90. Well, Jake Bauers was born during Brown lunation number 900. Brewers announcer Bob Uecker is currently 90 years old, and when they were eliminated, he was also exactly 36 weeks after his birthday. 36, the number that the moon shares with Brewers. So truly incredible stuff. Once again, professional sports delivers by the numbers, giving me another trove of endless content. In fact, I left a lot out of this super stream because I don't want to just drone on and on about numbers, but a lot of this stuff is relevant, even if I don't talk about it. Once again, I encourage you to check out the links in the description where you'll find my blog and various blog posts I've made about this. But man, what a wild one. Again, this is one of those videos where if anybody wants to watch one of my videos and none others, I think this might be one of those. Because this encompasses synchronicity through birth, synchronicity through death, astrology, astronomy, history, and of course, the fascinating numbers of professional sports. It's all woven together in this beautiful woven tapestry that shows that God the Creator truly is the ultimate geometer. And I encourage you to read into this philosophy of God the geometer and how we live inside of a mathematical system that could only be possible if there is an intelligence much greater than us pulling the strings and also encouraging us to love, as I hope one of the segments of this video explained to everybody. So, with that being said, that'll do it for the 87th edition of the Super Stream. Much love to all the viewers. Peace, love, God bless. We'll talk to you next time. See ya.